Hi, Justin. Welcome to the Di-scussions podcast. How
How
you
are you?
doing?
I'm good. I'm
Hey,
good. How's
I'm
everything?
I'm good, except I don't know if you can hear it. I'm in Miami. There's a crazy, crazy thunderstorm happening outside. Can you hear that?
I can't hear it, but I can imagine. Yeah, 3 o'clock. So I was born in Miami,
Uh-huh.
raised in South Florida, so I'm used to those. I will always remember those afternoon thunderstorms.
They're gnarly. And you know what's
Yeah.
crazy? I know we could basically unpack your whole life because I actually did not know that on top of obviously being the owner and head coach of Underdog Athletics, you used to be a recording artist.
Yeah, yeah. I always say in my previous life, yeah, I was for a long time. I had a record deal. I
A
sang,
record deal. You were
performed.
legit.
Yeah, I performed for all over the world. I sang with a lot of incredible artists. It's cool to see actually a lot of my friends still that are out there and performing. We're a real close friend of the family. She is one of Adele's background singers, but Adele's residency here in Vegas
Mhm.
actually just finished. So now she actually just joined Hosier in on his
Wow.
latest tour. She and I used to sing together a ton. Actually, in college, sang a ton with John Stevens, who you guys know as John
Uh-huh.
Legend, but he'll always
Uh-huh.
be
Yeah.
John Stevens to me. So yeah, we sang a ton together. Um, and yeah, just did some incredible stuff. Was on Letterman, like travel the world. Did the Red Cross Gala Ball, opened for Joe Cocker in front of the Prince of Monaco, and opened for Diana Ross. Opened for I was on tour with Chico DeBarge and John B. For those who are like R&B heads.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I had a it was awesome. I mean, I was put on earth to sing, so that was like my really calling, I would say. And
Yeah.
but I think being able to do what I do now is a different stage, and still being
Yeah.
able to help affect people in a positive way it's different than music. But in fitness, you're still changing people's lives, I think. And so yeah, it's been a cool dichotomy between the two,
Mm.
and it's fun for people who don't know that, who find that out and then go back and listen, and they're like, no, that's not you. And I'm like, yes, that is me.
I
Because
mean,
no one believes it's me.
your coolness factor went up like tenfold
Oh, that's
when
funny.
Pat told me that you were a recording artist when you and I both met.
Yeah, my stuff's still on Spotify and iTunes and
Wow.
stuff. So yeah, you can go on. It's under my stage name,
Okay.
which is Justin with a Y. Matthew is my middle name, so it's Justin Matthew. But yeah, if you go on Spotify or iTunes, you'll still see it there, and I'm sure you won't believe that it's me either. So
What I like about what you said is you're helping people. So it's true, music is very healing and movement
yes,
is very healing. And
yes,
obviously you've taken both to extremes, and I mean that in the best possible way, right? When it comes to music, it's being a recording artist and being on these big stages in front of big audiences. And then you have movement, which is competitive movement and helping people really push the limits in terms of what their body and minds can do. And I'd love to know how you think that your music career shaped you as a coach today, other than I'm sure playing amazing music at the gym.
yeah. I feel like I have very eclectic music taste, but yeah, I honestly, I think the ability to be able to affect people, and obviously being in front of people as a coach, especially like when I started coaching and I opened in a CrossFit affiliate, and I was coaching classes and coaching foundations and introducing people to CrossFit, to fitness. I think the ability to be able to be in front of people and feel comfortable, I think that was huge. I almost felt like, kind of felt like you were on stage a little bit. And if you could make that experience more enjoyable for people and more accessible, then they were more likely to stick with it, which I think is cool. Because you could be, the smartest and have all these certifications and know the science, but if you can't deliver it, then what good are you as a coach, really?
Sure.
So I think my ability to deal with that, and my ability to be in front of people and feel comfortable, in big groups, I think was very beneficial for coaching. And I also think just the ability to affect people. So, obviously music, you help, you almost take people away from the everyday, right? With music. And I think the ability to be able to affect people and in all kinds of ways. And I think in fitness, and especially in what I do now, which is really coaching elite level, CrossFit athletes, it is, you're helping someone to kind of maximize their potential as a human being, as an athlete, but it also, I think, just affects change, and that is, I think music did that. I think fitness can do that. It's slightly different ways, but without question, I've always felt like, I feel, if I really thought about it, my purpose is to serve. And so doing that, I think as a musician, singer, songwriter, etc., now as a coach, I think that is intertwined. And I think it's interesting because you see a lot of, former athletes that eventually go on to be musicians, and kind of vice versa. So yeah, it's cool. I have very fond memories. I haven't, I was a full-time musician, a full-time recording artist from like 1997 to like 2007.
Wow.
And then between 2007 and 2014, I kind of did both, where I started to get into coaching and fitness. And then I was still doing gigs, less of my original stuff, but a lot of like high-end event bands, where I would travel around the world with a 12 to 14 piece band, orchestra. And we would do these gigs everywhere with unbelievable musicians and singers, which was incredibly cool too. But it's been since 2014 since I was doing gigs consistently. And I do miss it. I mean, now I sing in the shower and for my kids and stuff. And,
Lucky kids.
yeah, we don't get, but it's cute because my kids really like it when I sing, especially my daughter who's 8,
Oh,
who still thinks I'm the best singer in the world. So it's pretty cool. And my wife actually is a phenomenal singer. She was a musical theater major in college,
wow.
and did a lot of musical theater on the East Coast, kind of up and down the East Coast. And it's funny, we didn't meet each other when she was doing that, or when I was a full-time singer. We met each other more in the fitness realm. But it's cool to kind of have that to share together. And she had an uncle that passed last year, and we sang a song for the funeral and stuff like that, to a duet, which was, I think very impactful, and I think they were, very appreciative. But yeah, it's pretty cool. It's definitely been an interesting life, that's for sure.
I love that. And obviously, at a certain point, you decided to just go all in as an entrepreneur within the CrossFit space. So, what was that moment like, that mental state? Was it full of doubt? Was it full of fire? Was it both? What were you feeling?
I think I've always been pretty confident in my, I don't say in my abilities, but I think, I always felt like I always felt it would be successful. It was 2010 when I decided to open up, my own affiliate. And, I got real deep down the CrossFit rabbit hole, which a lot of people can, you fall in love with the methodology, and you fall in
You
love
drink the
with,
Kool-Aid.
yeah, you fall in love with the training. But what was really cool was at that time, starting to coach people and see the effect that it had on them. And I think that's what was the big pull for me, the big draw. And so we opened up a place in Astoria, New York, called Dynamics, CrossFit Dynamics. And it became really a mainstay in the Northeast. We became a really, well respected and well thought of affiliate. We won a bunch of titles at the Northeast Regional, but beyond that, I think just in general, we were able to introduce thousands of people, to fitness, to CrossFit, and I think it was unbelievably impactful. And then we were there in New York, for all that time until the pandemic, and
Mm.
really, the pandemic kind of changed everything. And, if anyone knows anything about gyms in New York, they were shut down for almost a year. I mean, they basically just demonized gyms
Yeah.
incorrectly after the
Yeah.
research was done. But yeah, we were shut down, and, we were considered super spreaders. So, basically everything that we had worked to build and create, was basically lost in a year. And we made the decision then, because at that time I was coaching some high level athletes, one in particular, Carrie Pierce, who eventually would go on to make the podium at the games. And, we decided to move out to Vegas. Carrie moved with us, and we brought, at the time, a 3-year-old and a 3-month-old.
Oh,
We packed up 2 cars, 2 kids, and drove 6 days
you
overnight
drove?
yeah, 6 days to Vegas.
Wow.
With a lot of stuff in the car, and then the moving company brought the rest. And, we've been here ever since. We started Underdogs shortly after that, and it's been quite a ride. And we love Las Vegas. We've made kind of planted some roots here, bought a house, and we'll be here for the long haul, I believe. My kids are now 8 and 5, and they love it here. And Carrie is funny. She's still here. She's about to have a baby now, so that's pretty cool. Um,
Yep.
but it's been quite a journey, and but yeah, I think it's been a kind of a beautiful progression, not without bumps in the road,
Yep.
but without doubt, it's been great.
I mean, from the outside looking in, you guys have skyrocketed, and at this point, who are the elite athletes that you are coaching?
Yeah, so currently I coach Alex Gazan, who most recently won the first WFP World Fitness Project event. She's currently, I don't know what her worldwide ranking is at the moment, but
Mhm.
she's definitely top 5 in the world.
Yep.
And so she's my, she lives here, and we're basically together just about every day at the gym. So that's pretty cool. But I coach a Belgian athlete, Manon Anganese, who's also on the WFP, and one
Yep.
of the best athletes in the world. I coach one of the best teen athletes in the world. She's such a cool story. She's 14, and she just won Torian Pro, and she'll be competing at the games this year. I coach 4 to 5 masters athletes who qualified for the games. And Underdogs as a whole, we coach a lot of fantastic athletes. But if you ask me who I've coached in the past, I mean, it's ridiculous how many
Yeah.
athletes I've coached. Some who are still competing, some who aren't. Some who are with me for short periods of time or long periods of time. But in general, I've been lucky enough to have both a male and a female who've made the podium at the CrossFit Games. I've coached 2 teams that have finished in the top 5 at the CrossFit Games. So I've done a few things, and I'm very proud of the reputation that I think we've garnered. But more importantly, I just think in general, I feel like we've done it the right way. I feel like, we've always, I feel like, had a reputation for being good to people and doing the right thing. And that's more important to me than anything, is kind of, for however long I'm in this, and when I leave, is that people will speak well of me, I think, is more important to me than anything. And so far I think we're doing okay.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, your roster runs deep, for the past few years. And as you mentioned, Alex Gazan won the World Fitness Project Event 1, that happened in Indianapolis, probably 3 weeks ago now.
Yep.
And I'm curious to know what your thoughts were on the WFP prior to it happening
Yeah,
and post WFP Event 1.
sure. I think we were all cautiously optimistic about what we were going to experience. I've been a very vocal proponent for several years, that I believe the sport needs to expand. I believe that the athletes need a real season, and that I would love to see a season kind of follow the likes of the PGA Tour or the ATP Tour, where you've got multiple stops during the year, where you've got tiered events, and that you've got maybe 3 or 4 kind of Triple Crown or Grand Slam events, and that you're able to earn points during the season, and at the end you have basically a winner, kind of a points winner that gets a bonus, etc. And I think we see that, which is really cool in sports where you've got singular athletes in individual sports, like tennis, like golf, F1, things like that, right? And ultimately, we know the importance of the CrossFit Games. I think obviously, being able to call yourself the fittest in the world is the ultimate title. But I also think that if we want this sport to expand, if we want sponsors to get involved, if we want fans to get involved, you can't just have the best athletes competing once a year. Like that's not going to happen. That's not the way it is. And we don't see that in golf. We don't see that in tennis. We don't see that in any sport, because in general, they're, even when you're playing football, like you're still getting the best and the best, so, ultimately, I was very excited about the prospects of the WFP, very excited about obviously the rosters. The male and female roster is unbelievable. I'd say, it's on par with the CrossFit Games. I'd say the stakes right now, you'd still say obviously that, being able to call yourself the fittest on earth at the CrossFit Games is the highest, I would say, title that you can earn. But right now, I'd say outside of maybe CrossFit Games and Rogue, I'd say WFP is right there. It's probably right there, number 3. But as far as the talent that they've been able to collect, the roster's stacked, like the field is stacked. And on the women's side specifically, I think, you could arguably say it's going to be better than the games field. And, I think that pisses a lot of people off. There's a lot of, back and forth right now, and people taking sides and whatnot. And to me, I don't like to take sides. The way I look at it is it's all good for the sport, for us to be able to have these athletes competing, and for people to be able to watch it, and for fans to be able to buy tickets and see it in person. I think it's awesome. I think it's an unbelievable opportunity. I'm all about opportunities for athletes and coaches and media, etc. So, I think going in, I was optimistic, cautiously optimistic, in the sense that I just I was curious to see what the event would be like and how they would pull it off. I think the event itself was great. I think they did a great job. I think all the athletes were very happy. I think that the spectators were very entertained, which I think is incredibly important. I think the workouts themselves lent themselves to great races. I think for first go, I thought the live stream was pretty good, but I think obviously they know that there are some things that they have to clean up. But in general, I was happy with it, and I think there's a lot of people that are doubting whether it's sustainable. But at the same time, I think that's just speculation. I don't think people really know, the type of money that they have invested in this. I'm sure that the people behind this, like, they know that this is going to take a while, and I'm sure that they've planned for that. But without question, I think you'd have to say that the first WFP stop was a success. And I think everyone's very excited for the next 2.
I agree with everything you said. I've been saying from the beginning, I'm all about providing a platform for athletes to get more exposure, more money.
Yep.
That in turn also means that sponsors and brands have more exposure. It's just this big circle where it's that you feed into it, and then people just get more and more advantages out of it. And by people, I mean not only the athletes, but also the people within the brands and the spectators, the lovers of the sport, media. I'm all for it. And I do think that this year was, for lack of a better word, messy.
Hmm.
Just in general, if you take a look back at the calendar year with regards to all the different types of semifinals and different ways of qualifying to the CrossFit Games. You add on WFP, you add on things like um, Tier Wadapalooza, whether in Miami, SoCal, you add on Rogue, Dubai, etc. I mean, yes, there's a lot of opportunities, which is awesome, but it's kind of, I would say, and I can't find a better word other than messy. Just
Yeah.
from an athlete and coach perspective, it must be really hard to be like, okay, let's figure out what makes the most sense for you to compete in, the timing as well.
Yeah.
Some people like Torian Pro just was this past weekend. Some of the athletes there, I think Hannah Black is one of them, competed 4 times in the past
And
few
she's
weeks.
actually on the roster for NorCal this upcoming weekend
Is
too.
she really?
Yeah, I don't know that she'll do that. I hope someone stops her. I'm not her
Oh,
coach, so I can't. But yeah, I hope she doesn't fly back from Australia and do NorCal too. I think, you know, I agree with you. I think it's not only messy, but confusing. I think it's confusing for the fans. I think it's challenging for the athletes to, to know what the right thing to do is. And, you know, I think if you take a look at what we've done with Alex, and we'll see whether it proves to be the right path, but we decided to basically forego online semis.
yeah,
We didn't do them so that she would be prepared for WFP. And then we decided not to do any other semis other than NorCal coming up because it spaced out very well. It lined up well to be able to give her the rest that she needs
yeah,
to be able to again feel like, she's able to peak for this upcoming weekend. And then it gives us, 6 to 7 weeks to prep for the CrossFit Games, which is a really nice cycle leading in, a nice phase, a nice building phase. And uh, not a lot of other people did that, and we've taken a little bit of heat from people saying, oh, it's, you're not taking all the chances that you can take and this and that. But when you look back at the history of the sport, really and truly, like you generally had one shot,
yeah,
you generally would do, uh, you know, prior to quarterfinals, it was basically, the open and then you'd have regionals, right? And then after they got rid of regionals, is when we started to get quarterfinals. And then, quarterfinals sent you to semis and you
yep,
had one shot at
yeah,
semis. So the way that we're looking at it is like, this is her semi, right? I mean, it doesn't change anything from the past. I mean, the last 2 years, she's been at semifinals and like you had to qualify from your semifinal. Now there's less spots, but she's come in the top two in the last couple of years. So there's no reason to believe that won't be the case. And so, we kind of looked at it, in to try to be as, you know, intelligent as far as how much duress we want to put her under, right? Both physical and mental, and we felt that this was the best way to go about it. But yeah, I mean, I'm watching a lot of these athletes trying to chase a game spot, and they're doing, week after week after week, and at the same time, I kind of feel like it's not a coincidence that you're seeing a lot of them fall short, and I think it's because after a while, I just think you get physically and mentally fried, and so I'm curious to see this weekend in NorCal how many more, show up. Like we just
yeah.
saw Syndicate, we just saw Torian, we saw TFX 2 weeks ago. You're gonna see more and more people that are showing up. I also have a little bit of an issue with some of these semifinals that are just letting anybody come in.
Mm.
It's like, oh, they didn't make it this week. Sure, come on in. It kind of looks like a money grab to me. But they can run their events however they want to. That's part of it.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate here, but let's say if the calendar year isn't as quote unquote messy and you have events that are more spaced out and that make more sense, right? In
Mm-hmm.
terms of going to the CrossFit Games and then you have the WFP and other things. Are we asking our athletes to peak too often without really having some downtime?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. That's why I think there needs to be a dedicated season. I think you need to have, you know, and the way we've looked at this, uh, Alex didn't do an event until WFP. So that was in May. And her final event will be beginning of December
Yeah.
at the next WFP. And so the way that we're thinking about it is that's her season.
Mm,
And then her off time, she'll get downtime, which used to be kind of November, December, but now since Rogue has been pushed back and now WFP is pushed back, we'll just make sure that the beginning of the year, she'll get a month or two of downtime.
mm.
Probably a month off completely, and then back in with just working on conditioning and running, some of the things that we know we just need to continue to get better at. But we won't go full bore after what I consider to be the season. And that might mean that she sacrifices a few events at the beginning of the year, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
That's the way it's got to be. I just think the season, you have to have a built-in off season. And unfortunately we don't have that now. And I'm hoping, in the future that we will. I
Yeah.
think you look at most sports and they do, they have a couple of months where there's really nothing going on. And I think it's important. I think it's important for the athlete's longevity. I think it's important for their mental health, their physical health, emotional health, all those things. Um, you know, this is a hard sport. It's not easy. It's really challenging. I would argue it's the hardest sport to train for,
Mm.
because you have to be good at everything, you know. Uh, Generally speaking, you look at other sports and everyone's a specialist, right? Like you're good at a specific skill, a specific movement. This is not. You have to be good at everything.
Mm.
And so it's hard and you're constantly working, you're a lot of it has to do with weightlifting and high skill gymnastics and the things that are very very challenging on people's bodies. And if you're not if you aren't taking the time to rest and recover, your shelf life's not going to be very long.
Yeah. Agreed. And if you take a step back, I'd love to know your thoughts on this, and I know you will have some thoughts. Um, what do you think is wrong with the broader CrossFit ecosystem right now? What are we getting wrong?
Well, man, oh man, where do you start? uh, I think we're at a crossroads, and I've thought that for a little while. Um, you know, um, I think I think that the methodology is still the most effective way for a regular person, right? A regular human, um, to stave off disease, decrepitude, all those things as they age. The beautiful thing about CrossFit is that it is modifiable, right? Um, and no matter what age you're at, you can do it in some capacity, because all those functional movements are important as you get older. You got to be able to get out of bed. You got to be able to sit down and stand up. You got to be able to get off the ground. You got to be able to do all these things, put something on a shelf, right? Um, where I think we are hurting at the moment, is you're seeing a lot of, I would say, conflict between sport and methodology. You're seeing a lot of conflict between, uh, you know, athletes, and I wouldn't say it's from the athletes. I would say from the community, because the athletes want to be athletes, and unfortunately, um, I personally, and a lot of people don't agree with me, but I've always felt that sport needs to be separate. We need a governing body that hold sport as a priority. Whether that sport is called CrossFit or not, I don't know. It might be something else. The methodology will always be CrossFit. That's what it is. The methodology is CrossFit, and no one is saying that it shouldn't be CrossFit, at least in my eyes. Where's the best place for you to learn how to do some of these things? At a CrossFit affiliate, without question. I mean, I introduced thousands of people to this methodology at my affiliate over the 10 years that we owned it. I love CrossFit. It's changed my life. I've devoted my, adult life to it after music. But I think where we're running into issues is that we forget that things evolve. And CrossFit 2001, 2007, 2014, 2020, now 2025, it's not the same. And these athletes are just different, For you to be successful, you have to be a full-time athlete. There are very few exceptions now. You could still name a couple, but you can name them on one hand, who have full-time jobs and who are also successful as CrossFit athletes. But as we get further and further along, that's not going to be the case. Everyone's going to have to be a full-time athlete. And how do you expect those athletes to be able to train and compete if they aren't making money? So the opportunity has to be there for them to make money. The problem right now is that, CrossFit's, HQ, I would say sport is probably third or fourth on the totem pole, right? You've got other things that are in front of it, and that's fine, except for the fact that if you want the sport to grow, then that can't be the case. There's no other sport where the sport is fourth or fifth on the totem pole. It's just not, and I think there's a way to do it so that you build the sport, but that it works synergistically with the methodology. And I think right now the problem is that everyone kind of sees it as this instead of this. And until we fix that, I think we're stuck, and I don't, I don't know exactly what that means. Maybe the new owners, because it's obviously very public that Berkshire's selling.
Yep.
Maybe the new owners do that, but I think that depends on the owners. Depends on ownership. From what I'm hearing, and all you hear are rumors. There's a couple of groups that I would be very optimistic that would happen, and there are a couple of groups that I would not be optimistic that would happen. I think it would go the other way, and I think it'd be I think sport would might even be abolished completely. If certain people come into power. So at the end of the day, I think that there's a way for everything to move forward. But, I think hubris and ego get in the way. And unfortunately, we're not, the powers that be are not on the same page. And, until that happens, I think we're going to continue to be kind of stuck. And that's what it feels like to me right now.
Do you think that the sport aspect of CrossFit is what drives the growth of its methodology, i.e., at the grassroots level, which is your local gym?
I think it's a massive, massive part of it. And I think it's a bigger part than anyone wants to admit.
That's interesting. Do you think that it's because people look up to the athletes?
100%. I think you've got superhumans doing superhuman things. It's incredibly inspiring. They are showing you what is possible. And I think everyone is inspired by greatness. I think that's why you look at the greatest athletes of all time. And, I can think that those people are some of the most impactful people in history, and what they've done for their sports. I think, it's immeasurable. And I think that that's the same thing for CrossFit. I think a lot of people who came into our affiliates came into our affiliates because they saw the CrossFit games.
Mm.
Now I won't say that's the only reason, but I'll say that obviously it drives people to want to be able to do things, to do amazing things. And in some cases, it's what inspires people to just get off the couch, which
Mm.
is unbelievable, right? Um, I just don't think it's ever been packaged or marketed correctly. And obviously since they got rid of media back in 2019, I think we've been missing, what the sport could do for the methodology. I've been very outspoken about, kind of packaging things as a reality show similar to Drive to Survive or Full Swing. I think that the sport lends itself very well to that. I think there's some incredible stories. I think that there's some incredible characters. I think there's a lot of drama. And I think that we live in a world now where unless you take advantage of that stuff, you kind of get, left in the dust. And we see the sports that were kind of niche sports that have now become mainstream, UFC, F1, etc., that are exploding across the world. And that was 100% because of the reality shows that were created around it. And I think, we're missing the boat, not packaging something, because we'll always kind of be very niche if we don't expand and bring in, a much wider audience.
It's interesting that you talk about packaging something because I do think it's about how you present the sport, not only to the people who love it and know about it already, but also to people who don't yet. So, of course, we've had the CrossFit Games broadcasted on ESPN, for example, right? But I don't know if you noticed, but I was watching Syndicate over the weekend on YouTube, which was great because they were broadcasting it. But one of the broadcasters said something in the beginning on day one. Within a few minutes of the broadcast, because there were some issues with the broadcast and there were comments on YouTube, the broadcaster said, "The audience can suck my dick."
Yeah.
So when it comes to packaging a sport, are we shooting ourselves in the foot by providing this kind of image to not only people who love this sport, but also to people who might just be tuning in out of pure curiosity? Do we lose them?
Yeah. I mean, obviously that's disappointing, right? But I think we see right now there's I think that the culture right now is very toxic,
Agreed.
and I think I think more so than it's ever been, unfortunately. I think that there's a lot of sides pinned against each other, and yeah, I hate to see that. It's just not the way that I kind of have ever felt in this community, but I do right now. You kind of feel it, and I don't know how to change that. Really, I think ultimately it's got to come from the top down. And right now it's not coming from the top down. And but I think when I say packaging, I think obviously done in an incredibly professional way. In a way that basically those that are on the media side should be unheard. Like you look at it when you see Full Swing or you see Drive to Survive, like Netflix, the people that produce that, they're not giving you an opinion. Like they're just providing the story.
Yep.
And that's what we need. We need people shooting, but the stories coming from the athletes
Mm,
and the coaches
mm,
and those that are in the sport that people are interested in, not those behind the camera, which
mm,
and that's what I think I would want to watch. That's what I watch. I love Drive to Survive, and I love full swing, and I love the Tour de France one, and there was one called Sprint, which was about
Mhm.
the Olympic athletes. That stuff is riveting to me, and I think it is to regular to everyone pretty much, because again, I love to watch greatness. I'm interested in those people's stories and what makes them great, and their emotional and mental struggle and physical struggle, and what's their story, and who do they get along with, and who do they fight with, and it's interesting, and
Mm.
I think if we did that, that's the best way to do it. You know, and obviously I'm appreciative of people that and are providing us the ability to be able to watch some of these events, and I'm appreciative of that. But again, it's about athletes, and it's about the sport. It's not about them.
Mm.
And ultimately, I don't know right now if that's the case.
And I think that's really well put. And I think you brought up some really good points. And speaking of riveting, you might have to put your coach's cap on right now. But the CrossFit Games just makes people dream, right? Like
Yeah.
watching these athletes do these incredible things amongst their peers of the greatest athletes on earth, right? What would be your dream event? One event at the CrossFit Games?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and it's hard because do you answer it as a coach, as an athlete, as a spectator of the sport? All of them? Is that even possible?
That's like an impossible question.
Yeah. So let's say as a spectator, what
Yeah.
you love because you're a lover of this sport and this is why you became an entrepreneur in the sport of CrossFit. What
Yes.
is your dream event to watch at the CrossFit Games?
Oh, I mean, now of course I'm like going back through, 18 years of CrossFit game events. Um, you know, I think I th- I think it's hard for me to necessarily pin down specific movements that I would necessarily want to see. But I I think that, you know, what we need to see are events that are and I know that, I think that there are a lot of purists, like CrossFit purists, that would argue, well, it's not about what the spectator wants to see, it's about the test. It's about, you know, and that's not what I think at all. I think it's 100% about putting a fantastic test together that is unbelievably entertaining for the public.
Agreed.
Maybe it was about the test in 2007, but it's not about that anymore exclusively. It's about the test and entertainment. It's a sport. You've got to put it together so that the audience is literally on the edge of their seats, right? And there are there hasn't been an event I would say like that in a few CrossFit games. I'd say the last one that was like that was the Capitol. I don't know if you
Mm,
remember that
yeah,
event.
absolutely.
But the Capitol was one of those events, one of those moments that I can say like that was perfect. Like that's that type of an event was the race, the meaning behind it, the setting, everything about it. It was an unbelievable test, but it was like perfect entertainment, you
Yeah.
know? Um, so I guess if I had to say one, it would be that, but it's kind of a cop out because I'm not creating my own, but again, I think you could, put together multiple, you know, events that would create that type of allure.
Mm.
Um, and I'd say we haven't seen that. I think programming last year was frankly terrible. Now, of course, what happened there overshadows everything that happened. But again, I think we've got an event that was already announced this year, and in my opinion, it's completely forgettable. Like, it's not going to sell tickets. It's not riveting. It's not interesting. There's a million ways we could have gone, and to me, it's just the same shit we've seen. Sorry for saying that, but it's the same stuff we've seen, you know, for years, in my opinion, that you kind of look at and you're like, really? Like, that's what you came up with? And so, I, I think the most important thing you can do as a programmer is to figure out a test that is comprehensive, that at the end you can say without question that the person that wins is the fittest, but also where you can look at it and say, man, that's going to be entertaining. Like, people are going to bug out over these events, all of them. Like, you can't have a throwaway. There's no throwaways anymore. Like, this is an instant gratification world. Like, if you have a throwaway, the eyes that are on it in that event, they're not going to follow it anymore. They're going to watch it and they're going to be like, this sucks. They're going to give it 30 seconds and then they're done. Especially the youth. Oh my gosh. I mean, the ones that are like this all day long, and they give you like 10 seconds, right?
Yes.
So whatever it is, it better be interesting. And for those of us, in the sport, like those that aren't willing to kind of make those changes with the times, then they shouldn't be in power. Like, they shouldn't have anything to do with the decision making, like obviously do the methodology and enjoy the methodology, but don't be part of the decision making, in my opinion.
I mean, all great points. I think at the end of the day, like you said, the sport has evolved, and what's really important to note now is what people want, and what people wanted years ago, maybe 10, even 5 years ago, they don't necessarily want now. They want more now. We've seen the sport evolve. We've seen the same kind of tests over and over again. We want to see something different, and that comment doesn't take away from the fact that we know how hard it is to come up with tests
100%.
that without there being a throwaway, right?
Yep.
That really keeps audiences engaged. And
I've programmed
that's hard.
big events before, on a very large scale. I've done it like myself or with, kind of programming partners.
Yeah.
And it's your responsibility to create tests, create events. The test itself is the whole weekend, right? Like, so every event has to be, it's kind of this comprehensive story. It has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end. Like, it's your responsibility to be able to kind of tell a story.
Yep.
But you have to make sure that the spectators, the fans, the people that buy the tickets are entertained. Like, that has to go into everything that you think about, right? Because if you don't, then those people, they're not going to come back and they're not going to tell their friends. And they're not going to tell their families, and they're not going to, and these are the ways that this kind of organic growth, obviously, that happens, but also the people that watch on television who, the algorithm points them to, CrossFit or fitness, like on YouTube, on IG. It's important. I mean, and people who say it isn't, or people who don't admit that, I mean, they're trying to sell you something, you know what I mean? Like, so yeah, I've done it and I know how hard it is, but it's very possible. Very possible.
I do think it's possible. And I think also the tragedy of what happened last year at the CrossFit Games reminded us that we have to keep in mind, obviously, safety, right? We want to make this crazy, interesting to watch, but we also want to make it as safe as possible for the athletes competing, right?
That has to be that probably is above everything. I mean, you can come out with outlandish tests, but if they're not, safe or feasible, or you're going to put people in jeopardy, then obviously, you can't do it. And I think I would be hard pressed to think that after what happened last year, everyone now is not, even doubly careful,
Yes,
right? I think now it's on a whole nother level of
thankfully.
yeah. So I would expect that whatever we see is going to be quote unquote safe. I mean, listen, it's a professional sport and people are going to get hurt. Like that just happens. It happens. But, you know, it shouldn't be in a situation that, where there's any type of obvious, any type of negligence or, even if there's an accident,
Hmm.
that it's not, costing someone their life. And I think, last year was on the edge of, was this something that we really should do?
Yeah. And and to finish up on, I definitely want to end on a maybe fun note. It depends on how you want to answer this, but
Sure.
I was wondering because I always like to know how someone's job and their experiences doing the job has shaped who they are. I'd like to know how dealing with athletes and coaching them has perhaps changed who you are or perhaps put a magnifying glass on certain aspects of your personality.
For sure. I think more than anything, it has made me a much, much better listener and communicator.
Mhm.
Like, you know, I would say that when I first started in this, um, that I had a very, um, I don't want to say that it was kind of like my way or the highway, but I would say that, going in, um, I felt very strongly about, you know, this is my belief. This is the way I think things should be, and that when that came to programming, coaching, etc. Um, and I think over the years that I've learned to be a lot more of a chameleon. And that has to do with the fact that, the athletes that you coach and the people that you deal with, if you only have one way of doing things, you can't possibly affect all of them in a positive way. What might build one person up might be another person's kryptonite. And if you can't recognize that as a coach, then you're not a good coach. That's just the way that I see it. And over the years, I've become, I think, a lot better at understanding that, at evaluating, what makes a person tick, and also in listening to feedback and communicating and not taking feedback or constructive criticism, not taking it as an ego blow, where
Mhm.
a lot of people do, you know. And I think that's hard. I think that's hard to do. I think like if you feel like something's going well and then all of a sudden someone tells you like, hey, I feel like this could be better. I feel like this could be better. I feel like, and a lot of times like people are just like, oh yeah, well, what do you know? Like, yeah, screw you. So I think that that's something over the years that has really been, you know, something that I've had to work on and something that's getting better and gotten better over the years. And I think it helps me in every aspect of my life. I think it helps me in my relationship with my wife, my children, in general. It's just something that I think is important, especially with just communicating. But yeah, I'd say that's probably the thing that's been the most impactful to me.
I feel like the best lessons in life are learned the hard way. They're the
Yeah,
hardest lessons.
yeah, for sure. Yeah,
I thank you for all your insights and true to form, you are always very truthful and straight to the point, and I think that you expressed your opinions really well.
thank you.
And I think they were really insightful as well. So thank you very much, Justin.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.